Morning class. Today we are going to be looking at frequency tables or two-way tables. This is actually something you've done before. Usually my students are a little bit overconfident because they've done the basics of it, but some of the more complex ones are a little bit tricky. So make sure that you're really paying attention and not just writing things down and hoping for the best, because it often doesn't go well for my students on the assessment if they don't really pay attention to the steps here. So first of all, when we are looking at frequency tables, we are going to be calculating percentages, okay? And when we are calculating a percent, we sort of have two approaches that we can take. Option number one is that we can take the part and we can divide it by the whole and then multiply by 100. Okay, that's sort of the old school, just memorization, go by rote, calculate a percent. The part divided by the whole, and then multiply by 100. If you want to use that way, that's totally fine. Okay, this next option I'm going to show you is the exact same thing. It's what we did first trimester, is that we can also calculate a percent by setting up a proportion. Right, and we said a proportion was always the is over the of is the percent over 100, right? And so we had sort of two fractions set equal to each other like this, right? Where our of is 78 out of 22, and then we have x over 100. And then we could cross multiply and solve. Okay, so we could take 78 times x, which is 78x, and 22 times 100, which is 2200. And then we'll undo multiplication with division and divide both sides by 78. Again, a lot of these you'll just have to use your calculator on. Okay, we get a messy decimal, so this is 28.2051, more. Now, it will then tell you something to round to, right? So I'm then going to review our rounding rules to make sure we know rounding, because that's the other piece that gets my students all the time, is they do the math correctly, but they round to the incorrect decimal place. Okay, so we have our ones before the decimal point, and then after the decimal point, we have our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousandths. So notice the tenths is one decimal point after the decimal point. Okay, it's one position. Our rounding rules then say if the next value is less than 5, we are going to round down. Now, when I say round down, that doesn't mean move the number down. The number just is smaller because we cut it off. So if this is less than 5, we're just cutting it off. We don't change anything. Rounding down is don't change a number. So if we have 3.6493 and we are going to round to the nearest tenth, right? Our tenths is 1 after the decimal point, so that's 6. If we look at the number after it, that's a 4. That's 5. That's less than 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, or 4. Less than 5 is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Then we are going to keep this the same and make this 3.6. Okay, if the next value is 5 or larger, right, greater than or equal to 5, which is going to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then we are going to round up. Okay, rounding up, we do change the number. So again, we look at this. This is a 6, but the number after it is a 7. So since the number after it is a 7, I'm bumping that 6 up, and I'm going to make this a 4.7. Now, class, here's the thing. You always have to read the directions. The directions might tell you to round to the nearest tenth. They might tell you to round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, for these notes, we are going to round to the nearest tenth. Okay, so everything we go through, we're going to round through the nearest tenth. So if we look at this information below, a survey was done at WHS on what the best Thanksgiving food was. So we're looking at everybody's favorite Thanksgiving food. Okay, and this is the frequency table that was collected. So we can say that 6 freshmen picked turkey as their favorite food. Now, my strong suggestion is whenever you get a frequency table, that you go through and you add up all the columns and then you add up all the rows. So I would strongly suggest that you're taking time, pull out your calculator and start adding straight down. So take 6 plus 5 plus 2 plus 9 plus 7. Now you can do it all in your head, mental math, whatever. Okay, and start adding all of these down. So you do this at the same time that I am. Okay, once you add them all down, then start adding straight across. And we're going to see how we can check our math to make sure that we don't have any math mistakes. Okay, so now I'm adding horizontally. Okay, then what you're going to do is you are going to add all of these numbers straight across. Do not add all of the horizontal and all the vertical. We're going to add all the numbers in our total column horizontally. Which is giving me 118. I then, before I write that down, want to check my column vertically and make sure I'm getting the same thing. Which I am also getting 118. If those numbers are not the same, you added something wrong somewhere, and then you need to go back and double check your math. If this doesn't add up to this, then we did something wrong. Now don't add all of these up, that will be the wrong number. Okay, so that's the first thing that we did, is sort of doing those totals of each column. If these rows aren't in there for you, I would still strongly suggest that you're doing that, just to help make sure you're getting the correct math. Then we can answer simple questions like how many students in total were surveyed? That's going to be our number over here, right? This is our total altogether. So we're going to say that that was 118 students. We can answer other simple questions like how many seniors picked pumpkin pie? So I'm going to go to my senior column. And I'm going to go to pumpkin pie, and I'm going to see where these meet, right? I'm doing this column and this column, which is going to give me 5. Okay, we can answer things like how many total students picked pumpkin pie? Now, because we've already totaled, right? If we go all the way across our pumpkin pie row here, right? We already see that that's a total of 26 students. So those types of questions are just from reading the table. Those are usually ones that my students have seen before. It's when we get into the more complex percents and multiple things happening that my students struggle a little bit more. So we can also answer things like what percent or what percentage. So as soon as we read this word, just like we did earlier in first trimester, if we know that it is a percent problem, we know we can set up a proportion where we know a proportion always has 100 here. Okay, and we know we're going to be filling in the percent. It says what percent. So we know that the percent is what's missing. We know that's going to be our X. Now remember, we said this is always our part over our whole or our is over our of. Okay, so if we look after the word of, okay, after the word of in our story problem says the seniors surveyed. So we're going to go up to our list and we're going to look and see how many seniors were surveyed. So I'm going to go to my seniors and see the total of my seniors, which is 32. And that's what's going to go on the bottom here. Now, normally we would say this top word is, but we can really put anything in here: is, picked, decided, chose, preferred, are. It's really our sort of like prepositional phrase. Okay, so once we're deciding what they're doing, that's going to be the second part. And that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so now we're going to look at how many of them picked pumpkin pie. Now the key here is we cannot leave the column we already created. So we said we're in our seniors column, so we have to stay inside here. We just need the ones that picked pumpkin pie. So 5 of those seniors picked pumpkin pie. And so this is what we're going to solve, right? We said we could cross multiply. So 32 times x is 32x. 5 times 100 is 500. And then we're going to solve, right? We undo multiplication with division. Now in my calculator, I'm getting 15.625. I told you to round to the nearest tenth. So the nearest tenth is 6. The 2 after it is less than 5. So this is going to be 15.6%. Now we're going to sort of have to go back and forth because our next page has the questions and this page has the table, but that's okay. Okay, so our next question says what percent. So as soon as we see percent, right, we can set up a proportion. So I know that this is blank equals blank, or this is 100. And I know that this is saying what percent, so that's going to be my x, of the total students surveyed. So after the word of is the total students surveyed. So my total students surveyed is 118, so that's going on the bottom. Picked pumpkin pie. So I'm staying in this total column, right? I'm staying in this total column. This is my total column, but I want my pumpkin pie. My pumpkin pie from the total column is 26. So 26 is going to go on top, and I can cross multiply and solve. So I'll say 2600. You can multiply either way, whether you do the x first or the x second, it doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to use my calculator, and I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. So technically speaking, if we are getting really scientific here, this really rounds to 22.0% because that 3 doesn't change that 0. If you did not write down that 0, I would not take points off. It is an equivalent number. It kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of something you'll learn later. But so for right now, just understand if you wrote that as 22 or 22.0, I would count you right either way. Okay, if we look at our next one says how many more students? Okay, this does not say what percent. So this is not a percent question. This says how many more students picked mac and cheese over turkey. So we want to see how many students picked mac and cheese. 47 picked mac and cheese. And how many picked turkey? 20 total picked turkey. If we want to know what the difference is between those, right, how many more picked that, we're going to subtract. And so we'll say 27 more picked mac and cheese. Again, how many? This doesn't say what percent. How many freshmen and sophomores were surveyed? So I can do freshmen and sophomores. I can just look at these two columns, right? So I have a 29 plus a 38, which gives me a 67. So I can say 67 freshmen and sophomores. Now again, my next one says what percent. So as soon as I read that that's a percent, that's telling me I'm setting up a proportion, right? It's saying what percent, so that's my x. Now this says what percent of freshmen and sophomores. So I'm reading what comes after the word of. What comes after the word of is freshmen and sophomores. Now I set it up this way, right? But how many freshmen and sophomores we just answered in the question above? If we had not just answered that in the question above, you'd have to add those up. Picked green bean casserole. Okay, so we're in the freshman and sophomore columns, and we need picked green bean casserole. So we have to add these two together. So we need 2 plus 1, which is 3. And again, we're going to solve 67x. I'm cross multiplying. Solve. Okay, I get 4.47. This is a 7, so this is going to bump this up. So I'll get 4.5%. Next question. What percent, so there's a proportion, of students, so of students, right? I'm looking after the word of and waiting before what they picked or what they did. Okay, so of students, so my total number of students is 118. Picked turkey or pumpkin pie. So I'm looking for turkey, which is 20, right? I'm in my total column, turkey or pumpkin pie. So 20 and 26 will give me 46. So I'm going to start solving this. And divide by 118. Okay, I'm getting 38.98. I need to round up. Okay, so this is 38.98. This 8 tells me my 9 needs to go up, which means this needs to go up. So I'm really getting a 39%. What percent? So I'm saying what percent, so I'm doing a proportion of sophomores. Right, so if I look at my list, sophomores is 38. That's how many sophomores total I had. Did not pick turkey. So I want anything other than turkey. So I want my 5, 1, 13, and 11. So if I add all those up, that's going to give me 30. Now you could also subtract the 8 off, whichever preference you have. Okay, so I'm going to cross multiply. So I'll say 38 is x. So here I am at 78.947, but I'm rounding to the nearest tenth.